for this session, Increasing Your Grants Intelligence. So if you're looking for that session, you're in the right place. So this is the second year that we've done this in an effort to provide support for people who are working on proposal development, hopefully help people get connected to resources, know what some of the resources are, and stimulate a conversation about some best practices, and also, to be quite honest, just moral support. This is an activity that's challenging, so having a community that you can rely on, people you can go to ask questions, is nice. See if I can.
We'll get you the remote mic.
So just to give you an overview, I think people have this, right? If you want. Okay, I can do that. I guess I'm doing introductions. I'm going to talk a little bit about the proposal writing. I was corrected once by a colleague that it's proposal writing, you don't write a grant. The grant is the thing you get. So that's always stuck in my mind, a senior colleague criticizing me. We're going to talk about that part of the process. We're going to talk about the resources that are available to identify opportunities for proposal writing and other kinds of supports. Move on to some discussion of some topics, and then talk a little bit about, as it says here, current and upcoming activities that are and initiatives here on campus or more broadly. So it's my job to do an introduction here. We're getting close. I think I can. I've done this presentation many times in many contexts, so let's see if I can do it without a net, which I believe I can. There's a quote that I often use when I'm talking about proposal writing, and it as relates to a famous basketball coach, and who had just won. The team had just won an important game, and the interviewer said, "Well, I guess your team just had the will to win." That was what made the difference, is they just would not be denied. And the coach said, everyone has the will to win. What makes a difference is who has the will to prepare to win. And I think this is a really important point for writing a successful grant proposal, is everyone wants to get funded. Everyone thinks they have great ideas. Many of them do. It's the preparation that goes into thinking about writing a persuasive argument that is going to lead to success with a funder. Okay, so fundamentally, I think that to me is a really important point I didn't understand early in my career. Is I wasn't writing a journal article, wasn't writing a review, a scholarly paper where you show off what you know. If you don't know the literature, if you don't know the topic, when you're writing a competitive proposal, you're not going to make it very far at all. What you have to do is be persuasive and write this persuasive argument about why the project that you're proposing is is going to be an important thing for the sponsor to support. That looks like we're up here, so I can.
There's a remote if you want it right on top here.
Okay.
Next to the mic.
Yep.
Let's see if I can run it here. I'll sit this guy down here for now. Okay, let's just. That's not the right way. Okay, we went through that. So, so how do you approach this proposal so that it's persuasive? How is it going to be competitive? So I've chosen, for the purposes of this presentation, to break it down into four elements that I think are critical in the review of a proposal. And that's the problem, as it says here, the approach that you're going to take, the investigators, and then the setting, which is basically where you're going to do it. The problem, I'm going to wander here a little bit.
Turn it on.
So we're gonna, yeah, there we are. So the problem is, the organizing principle for the whole proposal, basically. And it's to, establish world peace, cure cancer, those sorts of things. Those are good, broad problems. But in a persuasive argument, this is super important because you've got to convince the reviewer, the person reading the proposal, that you have an important problem that connects more broadly than the usually very narrow bit of work you're proposing. So most grant proposals are going to describe projects that in the end are very focused. But it's critical that it doesn't seem trivial, right? It's part of a persuasive argument that it seems that it has these larger impacts. And so connecting to that big picture is really important, and connecting to the reviewer. Most times, people who are reviewing proposals are not going to have deep expertise in the problem that you're discussing. So you've got to try to find a way to connect to a broader collection of people who are going to be evaluating that proposal. So that sort of reviewer management is super important, to be thinking from the reviewer's point of view. Many times that reviewer is going to be looking at many, many proposals. And what's their interest as they're looking through those proposals? Is it to figure out reasons why they should fund your proposal? I see Sean over here shaking his head.
Shorten the stack as quick as you can.
That's right. That you are probably going to be reviewing proposals, many of which are meritorious. And so if you had enough funding, you would fund maybe 50% of them. But typically, you have to have a much more difficult task. So as you're reading, you're sorting. Found a flaw in this one. It's over here. And I think if you ever have a chance to review proposals, do it. Because then you get into the psyche of a proposal reviewer. And you see that if you're not engaging them in those first couple pages, you're toast. You're going to not be successful. So that's where the problem is really important in connecting the reviewer. I've got this photograph here of a mosquito because when I made this slide a long time ago, Zika virus was a big deal. And so that was in the news, lots of people were thinking about it, and I thought it was a great example of connecting to the big problem because you have all of these different disciplines that then are engaged by thinking about a problem of the spread of the Zika virus. And so if you were working in any of these fields and had an opportunity to write a proposal that spoke to this issue, that was really something that was in the news, was a concern very broadly. And so, how are you thinking about what might be front of mind for a reviewer as you're thinking about developing a proposal? So that's the problem. Next is the approach. So this is part of preparation. You got to be preparing yourself to recognize a good idea. So that's reading the literature, that's being aware of what other investigators are doing, and being connected more generally to things that are going on in your field and maybe even more broadly, like we were just mentioning the Zika virus. Because that'll then that'll prepare you then to see, here's an opportunity where I can bring forth a proposal that's going to get traction, right? That's going to be resonating. The other thing that many of you know is academics are addicted to novelty. They really like stuff that's new. So you get a lot more credit for a not as great new idea than you get for an older idea that might be just as good. So this is this idea of this paradigm pioneer, being somebody who's first proposing to approach a problem in a particular way. And so that's a feature that's going to get you more attention. Or finding a unique path. So I've got Uber up here as an example of taking an activity, people getting from one place to another, hire service for transportation. And here they have an old problem, but a very different approach to it. And then when you're writing a proposal, if you can get into that space, that's very helpful in terms of getting people's attention. So you're going to pique their interest as part of writing that persuasive argument. You're going to pique their interest about, well, here's something different. Here's something that, you know, is breaking new ground. And as you probably know, and from a number of funders, federal funders, something about the prospects for a proposal or an activity to push forward a discipline, break new ground, is often one of the criteria that are used to evaluate proposals. So an example here for me is, this is a screenshot from Popular Science, and this is one of my old graduate students here talking about a medical device that we developed called the sniff magnitude test, for which we got federal funding to develop this whole test. This whole idea, it was born in a totally different domain, unrelated to sense of smell directly, or to Alzheimer's disease, or any of the things we were doing in terms of the, you know, what this project was about. It was about why some people don't like to try new foods. It was about food preferences. And we had a suspicion that maybe people who were reluctant to try new foods would, if you were asking them to sample, not sniff them as much. So we had to develop a technique to study sniffing, and then once we did that, in this, Alzheimer's was a funding priority for NIH, neurodegenerative diseases, diseases of aging more generally, and so we could parlay that work into this big problem, just as one example of something that that I use to get multi-millions of dollars in federal funding. Okay, next, you, the investigator or investigators. I always tried to write a proposal that met this standard of how your whole life you'd been preparing for this work. Okay, and this is this other preparing to be successful. How can you characterize your career path as supporting the project? The more you can do that, the more you're going to be advantaged. You've got the right kind of background. You've been working on this problem. You've published in this area. You've got the right kind of collaborators and mentors. So that's something that when you're writing this persuasive argument, you want to think about trying to put yourself in that position, and that's another great example of preparing. This is how you prepare to be successful. It's thinking in those terms. You want to emphasize any way in which you're special, right? You've got special background, special skills that are really going to help the project. So in the end, you're helping the reviewer, you know, answer the question of, are you a good investment? And one other point I wanted to make here is, are you a good investment as a young investigator or a senior scholar? Because obviously the standard you're going to be held to is going to be different depending on the proposal that you're writing and where you're submitting it. So when you're younger, when you're earlier in your career, this job is different than when you're more senior. Okay, another important dimension of the proposal and writing a proposal that's going to be competitive is the setting. And it's just these things. You have access to what you need to be successful on this proposal. So that's, you know, you've got access to special material. Maybe that's a special population of people with a certain kind of cultural background or a certain disease state or whatever it might be. That you've got the kind of equipment that you need to support the project. That you've got colleagues who are going to support you, either here or elsewhere. Where you're located can sometimes be an advantage. So that's something to leverage. Here in Southeast Ohio, we don't have some stuff, but we have other things. And we should leverage those resources, which you'll see a lot of times there are programs that are pursued by the university that leverage our geography. Research participants, again, that's who, what populations do you need access to? You better be able to demonstrate that you do have access to those individuals or to those materials. So my example here is if you've got a three-eyed frog, use it to your advantage, because a lot of other people will not have that three-eyed frog. So just some general comments here before I end my part of this session. As I said before, writing a scholarly paper is very different from writing a proposal. A proposal is really something where you're not just trying to get the reader to say, this is a reasonable argument that the writer is making, which I think is the standard for a manuscript, but this is something I'm excited about and I want to invest in. So that's a different kind of approach. You want to compete within your league. That is, if you're a relatively new investigator, you want to be competing in programs with other new investigators. So you really shouldn't go after a career award when you're an assistant professor. So that's a due diligence of understanding the program that you're applying to. Make sure it's the right kind of program. This is like writing. You just get better at it. So you have to submit a lot of proposals. So that's, again, part of the preparation. You should be ready for failure. I think that's one thing that maybe wasn't clear to me when I entered an academic career, is how much you have to deal with failure and rejection. Your papers get rejected, your grants get rejected. You have to keep going on, because that's typical. That's part of our process. That's part of our culture. Proposal development takes longer than you think, much longer. So I would typically say, my NIH was my go-to funder, and I would say a good 9 months before I was thinking about submitting a proposal, I would start outlining it, figuring out what I needed to do. You know probably from your own behavior, from that of the more senior people I could talk to here, you're always in this huge rush at the end. Time seems to contract, and then the thing is due. And if you don't give enough time, you are not going to send in your best work. And so it really takes longer than you think, and you should really plot that out so that other people can look at the proposal, you can really feel good about it when it goes in. And then the final piece of this, and actually this is a great segue to kind of a change in our agenda here, is, as I say here, cultivate a cadre of critics. So George von Bekessy I think he won two Nobel Prizes for work he did in 2 different fields. And I always remember a quote that toward the end of his life he made. He said that it had become much more difficult to do good work as he became older, because all the people who had been his competitors and enemies became his friends. And so early in his career, he had different theorists, and they were working on problems in sort of opposition. And so these colleagues were very harsh critics of his work. And he recognized that as valuable, because it helped him do better science. So I grew up in a department where no one said a harsh word to anybody else. I mean, that was our culture, to be very collegial. I would ask people to read my work, and I remember I had a very distinguished senior colleague who used to send it back with like an extra comma, change of tense for one word in 20 pages. It was unhelpful. Didn't help the work be better in the way we needed. But what you need for this to work is you need to do this very intentionally, to cultivate, to seek out people whose opinion you value, and create the trust that you can get honest feedback. I can promise you the reviewers are going to give you honest feedback. You really don't want it from them. You want it before the proposal goes to them. So this is a cultural thing and a social thing. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to ask up one of our participants today, Darcy Allen, who's part of a learning community, where I think part of what they're doing is building that kind of community to give that feedback. So Darcy, you want to?
Thank you. This is a little bit of a change in the schedule because I have to leave early, so I appreciate you guys letting me speak for a few moments. So I wanted to talk about the faculty learning community that I developed last year. It's for NIH grant writing, or grant proposal writing, I suppose. So this was designed to be a place where a small group of faculty working on their own independent grants could come together to have a collaborative place to provide peer review and critical feedback and moral support as well to help us get through this. It was inspired by, I work with Dr. Julie Owens in the Center for Intervention Research in Schools, and we do a writing group in that center where faculty and students both present their work, so either publications that are going out or grant proposals, and we provide critical feedback. We read them for a week and provide written feedback, and then meet together to discuss it and try to brainstorm, come up with ideas for making it better. So that was the basic premise, but participation in this faculty learning community has given us funding to get these books. If you guys have not seen these, people who are new to grant writing, they're by Russell and Morrison, these grant application workbooks. They're so helpful. There are places where they will spend a whole paragraph describing exactly what point you need to convey in a single sentence in a part of the entire document. So very helpful resource there. We've also had funding to have speakers come in. So we've had Steve Evans from psychology come and talk to us, and Jim Thomas from physical therapy. Both work on panels, review panels, and they were pretty recently off of their review panels. So all of the pet peeves that reviewers have were fresh in their minds. They could warn us the things we should do, shouldn't do, and just give us general tips. Both of them also had the same speech about failure and kind of expecting it, throwing out as many as you can, because the people who get the most grants are the ones who put the most proposals out. So yeah, we've been meeting together. We're at the very beginning part, so hopefully I can report back at the end of this year and let you guys know how many we were able to put out. We're wanting to put a proposal out for each of us. I think we'll build some collaborations. We're a diverse group. We're from the College of Health Sciences and Professions, College of Education, College of Medicine, College of Arts and Science. I think that diversity is going to give us an opportunity to provide feedback to each other that's really different from what we would get from our usual colleagues that we get feedback from. And I think there'll be some collaborative relationships built. We also have funding to send our grants out, our proposals, before they go out to the actual mechanism, to send them out to an external reviewer. People are taking this very differently. Some people are getting feedback from people that they've wanted to work with for a long time and just haven't. Others are reaching out to individuals who, like, I'm going to reach out to someone I've never worked with before or spoken to see if she'd be willing to review my work for me. So I think that's going to be a really useful resource, and hopefully we can get some of that honest feedback before we send them out for actual review. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary of what we're doing, and like I said, we're right at the beginning, but I'll report back, let you all know how many proposals we were able to put out into the system.
Thank you.
So that Russell and Morrison, I didn't know you were, that's, a lot of my talking points are from hearing multiple presentations from Steve Russell, who does this. Okay, I don't know, are there any sort of questions or reactions to any of this before we move on to? Okay, so we're going to move along to our next part, and you're going to introduce yourself?
Sure.
You want this, or you want to?
Oh. Part of my presentation is going to use the internet, so we're going to quickly figure out if it's working, and if not, then I'll step away.
Okay.
So let's see.
You want me to do it?
Okay, so hi, I'm Dr. Roxanne Millay-Bruni. I'm with the Research Division. I'm the Director of Grant Development and Special Projects. And most people on campus just call me Rox, okay? And the take-home message for me today is to let you guys know, if you need me, find me. I love to go to coffee. I love to live vicariously through you all. I love to hear what you want to do, what you're doing. And it's my job to really try and tell you what the resources are and to point you in the right direction and just have that collaborative, I don't know, feedback, the sounding board. So, in the research division, I'm curious. How many of you would describe yourself as social and behavioral scientists? Raise your hands. Okay, how about arts and humanities? Life and biomedical sciences? Okay, physical sciences and engineering. Okay, so there's a real diversity in the College of Arts and Sciences, in case you didn't figure that out. It's not actually as true in other colleges. But the nice thing is that you all can have various sounding boards. Here's one of your sounding boards in the research division. So the research division, ohio.edu/research, we have Edison Biotechnology Institute, we have industry partnerships, the Innovation Center. All of those are sort of somewhat outward thinking. If you're going to be developing technologies that you want to commercialize. We also have the internal awards. Before I get to the next slide, how much money do you think we're going to be patterning out this year in internal awards to faculty, students, and staff? Ballpark figure. Somebody shout something out. It's time to wake you all up. Million? 2 million? Keep going. 5.5. Including the Ohio University Innovation Strategy, we should be patterning out almost $5.5 million this year. We also have the Office for Research and Sponsored Programs. Those are the people who help you put the grant applications or proposals, depending on what you want to call them, out to your funding agencies. They also bring the money back in. By the way, I always ask this, what happens if you are fortunate to get funding and you receive a check in the mail? There are some funding agencies that will do this. What do? Cash it and buy that Maserati. No. You bring it to RSP, and then we'll put it in an account for you all. Okay, research compliance. How many of you use animals or human subjects? Okay, if you do, hopefully you've gone through IRB and IACUC training. Research communications. How many of you, this is a fun question, how many of you did something really terrific in your research or creative works this year? Raise your hands, come on. How many actually told Andrea Gibson in the research communications office that you did this, or Lori Bauer? Okay, if not, shame on you.
Good work.
Because one, we want to recognize what you've done, but also we want to use you as our poster children. You need to go out and get the next generation of researchers and creative artists excited. If you can do it, so can they, right? That's always what we're trying to do. So definitely give us the good news and technology transfer. Okay, internal awards. If you go to ohio.edu/studentresearchfunding.cfm, that has all of our internal awards. So how many of you are new faculty? Meaning you don't have tenure yet. Good. So do you all know about OURC? Okay, we have $6,000 with your name on it. All you need to do is get a proposal through the committee. How many of you are established faculty members? That's Baker, right? Or established faculty members who are changing their direction. That's up to $12,000. Okay? We also have the 1804 fund, infrastructure, purchasing large pieces of equipment or curriculum development. I see Viral over there shaking his head. Yes, he's already been in the process. By the way, one of the best ways, as Bob said, for you to learn how to write a grant proposal is what? To actually sit on these committees. Now, our committees are appointed by Faculty Senate. However, if you are interested, we will allow you to read the proposals and sit in on the committee. You will not be able to vote, but you can go and you can hear your colleagues trash other colleagues' work. And the idea isn't to make you all depressed. It's to understand there is a reason why we call research research. It means research. Search again, right? It's an iterative process. It's actually fun to sit on the committees. You get to live vicariously through everybody. See what they're doing. Student Enhancement Awards. We also have PERF, undergraduate travel. It goes on and on. If you don't know it already, I encourage you to go to ohio.edu/student research. It is everything regarding student research, anywhere from the expo, where we have 894 students presenting their research in any way that's legal and safe, essentially. 15% of our faculty members serve as judges. We also have on that website the Science Cafe and the Cafe Conversations. And it's actually in a very easy way to get to the internal awards, because there's a big button that says, click here, internal awards. What questions do you guys have regarding the internal awards? Anything right now? The way that we think of the internal awards is not only a funding mechanism, it's a teaching mechanism. It's a safe way where you can put in your proposals, you get feedback from internal and external people, and hopefully progress to external funding. No questions about money. Y'all got it. Okay. How many of you put in a proposal this year, then, for an internal award? Good. How many of you plan to put in a proposal for an internal award? Okay, better. Maybe next year? If you guys have any questions, find me. I'm going to talk about Leo. It's a database. We've had it since 1982. It records all the proposals that have gone out from this university. It will tell you whether it has been funded or not. You can search by college, department, PI, and sponsor. Let's see if the computer works.
Just click on the link and it should take you.
That's what I'm hoping. Thinking. All right, Sergio, you promised. It's thinking, oh wait,
Oh, there-
maybe
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just
It just-
slow. Okay, I'm so excited, I just have to wait. Okay, that's right, it's cold outside. Everybody's thinking, just a little, okay. Okay. No, let's not remember this password. Okay. I have a lot of access through Leo that you all might not have. And I realize that. But what you're going to want to do when you go down to Leo is you're going to go down to where it says Search ORSP Database. And you're going to see all of these fun fields that you can fill in. Okay, we're going to be optimistic. The first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to look at proposal status, and I'm going to say award and grant closed. Yes, you can look at everything, so you can see, oh, my colleague put in this proposal, and look, they weren't funded. If that's what you really want to do, you go for it, but let's just look at award and closed. And we're also going to look at, let's say, last fiscal year, okay? And because we're doing arts and sciences, let's look at arts and sciences. Okay, there we go. And we hit the search button. And there are 80 awards were granted in fiscal year 2016. Okay, but let's go back and let's narrow it down. Okay, I'm going to pick a department. I'm going to pick it just because my husband is in that department, and I happen to know that there are a lot of grants in there. Physics, in case you all didn't know, Carl Bruni. And I'm going to hit search. Sergio Yoloa is also from that department, and you're going to see 26 grants. But just a lot of people go, you know, all the grants, they're always in the sciences, the hard sciences. I'm like, no, they're not. Let's go and look at psychology. Okay, and that's Julie Sears and Julie Owens' department. 10. Okay, these are significant numbers of people who are putting in proposals and getting these grants. All right. Let's just say that you don't want to look at it by college. So I'm going to clear that out. And I'm going to clear out the department. And we're going to look up an individual. And last year, I sort of embarrassed the individual, so I'm not going to do that this year. I'm going to pick somebody who isn't here anymore. Ann Tickemeyer. Does anybody remember Ann Tickemeyer?
Yes.
Sociology and anthropology. She retired. Oops, because I put in 2016, I have to remove that. She wasn't here then. And here's Ann's career in terms of proposals, and so you can look at it. Why the heck is this useful? It's not because you want to go spying on Ann Tickemeyer, but let's just say that you do research which is very similar to Ann. What you can do is you can look at all the sponsors, and you can go, oh my God, I didn't know that they gave money for this. So if you know somebody at the university who does similar research to you, you can spy on where they're getting the money. But more than that, you can find out maybe, I'm thinking about going after a funding agency. So I'm going to clear this one out. And we talked about, should I look up the National Institutes of Health or should we look at somebody else? Okay, let's just put in national. Okay, National Institutes of, I gotta go down because it's institutes. There's more than one. So now if I'm interested in the National Institutes of Health, 312 people have been funded from them. What can you do? You can call them up and you can say, hey, I'm really interested in getting funding from this agency. What can you tell me about it? Would you be willing to share your proposal with me? Or at least can I talk to you about that program officer? These are all things that you can do when you go into Leo and you can just find out various information. Any questions about Leo? Okay. Y'all are quiet. Okay. We also have Pivot. How many of you have used Pivot? Okay, so you know what it is, right? It's a database. Hundreds of thousands of opportunities. You can search for grants and fellowships and travel awards. Your students can also do this, and I'm going to take you there, hopefully. And we're just going to give one example. We're going to play with it one time, and then hopefully you all can play with it on your own. So welcome. The first time that you're going to log into Pivot, you have to be on the university campus because it's going to recognize your IP address. And you're going to use your ohio.edu email. At this point, as you can imagine, I've logged in a few times. So, Isn't one internet wonderful when it actually works? I'm just so excited. I don't know if any of you were here last year, but here I was trying to make the internet work at the same time as trying to give the talk. It was difficult, let's just say. Okay, so welcome to Pivot. What's the first thing that you see? Fill in the blank, right? And we're all compliant people. We want to fill in the blank. No, don't fill in the blank. The way that Pivot works is because there are so many opportunities. The way that they key the words can be different than what you do. You'll say ocean, they'll say sea. You'll say researcher, they'll say research. It is that critical. Don't fill in those first couple of things until you know the system well. So for example, I know the system well. When I work with my students, I can type in the word internship. It always works. Everybody says internship. Instead, skip. And you're going to go down to amount. There are times where you need a big grant, right? If I don't get at least $100,000, I am not doing this project. But there are also times where you don't need that much money. And so this allows you to put in a boundary, plus or minus a certain amount. But let's just say that you don't care. Leave it blank. Okay? Deadlines, the same thing. I need the money. If I don't get it within the next 6 months, I'm dead. I don't need it for a year. You can put boundaries on that too. You can leave it blank. Limited submissions, that has nothing to do with you. That's only for universities, so don't bother filling it in. Don't you feel good? At this point, you could basically leave everything blank. No. Okay, now activity locations. The way that grants and fellowships work is most of the time they're asking what is the actual project that they're funding, right? But every once in a while, they want to know where are you doing it. How many of you have heard about the Fulbrights? Very country specific, right? We also have the Appalachian Regional Commission, very regional specific. We also have the Ford Foundation. They like to fund in Africa. So if you are doing research or creative works in a particular location, go ahead and put that in, because sometimes you can find funding that is specific to that region. Or you can leave it blank. When you type something in, so for example here, let's just say that I wanted to do Africa. Type it, do not hit the return button. Pivot's crazy about returns. And then what you could do is you can pull from one of the drop downs. But for right now, I'm not going to make that part of the search parameters. And we are just going to leave activity location. Okay, citizenships. How many of you are non-US citizens? Sorry, Pivot won't work for you. No, only kidding. Actually, you're very lucky. Pivot picks up opportunities from other countries, not just the US. So a lot of times people go, all right, if I'm not a US citizen, it's not going to work. Yes, it is. What it's going to do is it's going to look and see if there are additional opportunities from your home country. And we have several students and faculty who rely on funding sources from those regions, rather than just from US. And if so, just go ahead, select your country. Funding type. This is important. I'm going to make an assumption for this that we are looking for. I will start at the beginning again. There we go. Okay. So you can see artistic pursuit. You could do that. If you were a student, you could do dissertation or thesis, for example. But in this case, I'm going to tell you, always pick prize or award. That's sort of the catch-all. When they have no idea where to put something, that's where they put it. Most of you are going to put researcher. If you are a creative artist, you would have picked the first category instead. And sometimes you're looking for, let's say, research travel, okay? Gotta go down. This is where it gets fun. Okay. Your first inclination is to fill in the blank. Remember, do not fill in the blank. The reason why is you may pick something like biofuel. I was doing a search, and for the life of me, I couldn't find anything on biofuels. It turns out that they call it biomass. Okay, fine. So what you want to do is you want to hit the browse button. This is how they create it. Now let's just say that we want to do military history. Where are we going to find military history, do you think? Under which category? Arts and humanities. Yep, I agree with you. Now I'm going to select that, and then I'm also going to go in, and I'm going to go down, and I'm going to select history, and then I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to go down. And lo and behold, here's military history. So what I've done is I've selected the major structure, 1 in, 2 in. And you'll be able to see what happens with that. The applicant type. Do not pip that you are an academic institution. You work for one. You are not one. Instead, let's just assume that you are an individual and you're a mid-career to established. If you were an early career, you could have selected that. Also, it asks you, are you a minority? Because there are specific funding agencies that will fund minorities and also women. The last thing is a sponsor type. How many of you care who actually gives you the money?
A little bit.
Sometimes. I actually have a lot of environmental students who refuse to take money from certain businesses. And that's okay, and you can go ahead and exclude funding agencies if you want. I sort of like to look at them all and then exclude them, but you know, it's up to you. There is an exclusion field down below, and typically the reason why you want to use that is, let's just say that you do your search and now you have 2 different areas and you want to exclude one of them. That's how you would do it. So let's go ahead and do the search. Okay, how many of you are ready to look at a search that says 1,386? Probably not, okay? Now what you can do is you can look, and down along the side, you could theoretically look at the 274 that fall under this. So you could pick your specific areas where you wanted to look, or you could just go back up. And the first thing that I'm going to tell you to do is save this crazy search. Even though it's too big, go ahead and save it, give it a name. If you click the box here, would you like to receive every Monday morning, you're going to receive an email that says, hey, new opportunity. So you don't have to keep on going back to Pivot. It will come to you. If it gets like a little bit too much like stalking and you don't need it anymore, you can shut it off. But the reason why I want you to save it first is because then you can go in and you can refine it, and we'll refine it, and then you can save another search and give it another name. In this case, what happens if you take off all of arts and humanities and you only have history? And you search again. 675 results. Okay, a little bit more manageable. And you could imagine that if you went in and you took out history and you only looked at military history, that'd be great too. How many of you think that you work in a multidisciplinary field? Okay. This is where you really do need to go and you need to play. Because it's play, it's fun. So we're going to go back to the keywords. And we're going to go to browse. If you are in a multidisciplinary field, it's important for you to go and to look around the keywords. So for example, when I was doing that search on biomass, the first thing that I did was I went to agriculture and I said, okay, we're taking crops, right, and we're digesting them and we're making biofuels. So I looked in there a little bit and I picked agriculture, okay. And then I said, oh, it's also energy sciences. So I selected that. And I went down, and I said, okay, where would biofuels fit in here? What do you think? My first thing was renewable energy, and I went, okay, good, I'm feeling good about myself, and I closed it. And then I went and I put biofuel. And lo and behold, nothing about biofuel, and that totally stumped me. And then I put biomass. Does anybody notice the error I made? So I thought that my categories were going to be energy sciences and renewable energy, but lo and behold, it's actually under hydrogen and synthetic fuels. So what I tend to do is tell people, go into the browse, look at the various categories. Do not assume that you are just in one of the major headings. Go ahead and look at the other ones, and then at the end, type in your word and see if you can find it and where it tells you it thinks. Any questions about Pivot before I turn over the mic? Go ahead. Hi, I'm Roxanne, and you are?
Edna.
Hello, Edna.
So in order to ask that question, I'd like to go back to internal award.
Yeah, go ahead. Back to internal awards.
Connect you to the mic so that.
Hello? It's not scary, it's just us.
Okay, so,
And by the way, there are no stupid questions, but if I have a stupid answer, I apologize ahead of time.
well, I do have to ask that question. So, internal awards, how much of the internal awards are distributed to different ranking faculty members? Because I'm a group 2, so, you know, how much of that money could I really get? Or-
Okay, so the question is, you know, she's a group 2. Do we give out internal awards to group 2s? And the answer is yes. As long as you have an email from your chair or dean saying that you have within your responsibilities as a faculty member to do research, and that can be defined very differently in different departments, you are eligible. From that point on, we do not look at your status at all in the criteria for
Okay.
the selection.
But if I'm not obligated to do research, but I still want...
Obligated and encouraged are two different
Right.
things.
So you asked if my chair will say that it's part of my responsibilities.
Correct.
But then if it's not, but I still want to do it, so I'm not eligible anymore.
I think that the answer is we need to talk, because everybody thinks about teaching, research, and then service, right?
Right.
And what faculty will sometimes tell me, group 2, they will say, well, I don't have an expectation of research. But then I will say, okay, as part of your community service or as part of your teaching, is there an expectation that you remain current in your field as a scholar and a researcher? And very often the answer is yes. And then that's how you get in.
Okay. So for Pivot, when I'm applying, do I have to indicate what kind of
For Pivot, all you would say is...
title I have?
Yeah, all they ask is whether or not you are an emerging or a mid-career or established. There is another category for visiting, which would be some of our group 4s, but other than that, no.
Okay, thank you.
It's,
You're
I think
welcome.
sometimes it's full-time status that they care about.
Okay.
So they
Yes.
probably wouldn't care about some of our arcania about how we talk about faculty as long as you're full-time.
And we've had many faculty members as visiting faculty, adjunct, who have also pulled in grants through Ohio University.
Thank you
So-
very much.
Yep, thank you for asking.
Let me invite you to maybe have some coffee, you know, stretch your legs or whatever. We want this part of the session to be more interactive, so we'd appreciate your questions, and please go ahead.
Helpful? Yeah. It's just
Let me sneak a peek.
This basically writing tips and that's sort of more specific.
So deadlines. Can't.
The internal awards again, yeah.
Yeah, because there are some other people from outside of arts and sciences. It's not just arts and
That's what I
sciences.
forgot, because Sean is here and I should have asked.
They opened it up.
No, I should have asked if people were outside of arts and sciences, because you have some people here today.
Well, here's an experience I've had.
Here, about last year, but it was not that much.
That's always good. And I even put in the biomass biofuel example, because that one stumped the heck out of me.
Well, this is the
I mean, aren't you doing presentations just on this? We should probably advertise. Is that advertised at the end?
Yeah.
When is the next one of the?
It's in February. But honestly, I will sit down with anybody. It takes 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's on the.
Yeah.
We have the actual date too.
And sometimes,
And if people are
many
aware
of
that
the
they
faculty
exist and so
member in here, I've just gone to coffee with.
knowing that
I like to do that for a half an hour, and we just sort of
eligible
plot
or
out
whatever.
what they might want to do.
Should we?
Sure.
One of the things that I meant to mention in the open law is sometimes people think that you can have to talk to
And
somebody
next
who has
year, we're
deep
talking about
expertise
having
in order to get to
workshops where they're much shorter,
You need that.
where we have a former
But,
program
yeah.
officer come in for an hour and a half and talk about it, and then we have a panel of our faculty members who know that agency. So it's really 2 hours,
Well,
and you
I
can
mean,
go,
there's
you know,
you
we
can,
run it as
yeah, there,
concurrent
it will come, I
sessions,
guess.
and people can just go
It's
along
an
with
barrier
us.
then. It's like, well,
Hi.
that person doesn't.
Hello.
Yeah, right, right. It'll be no useful.
When you're talking about getting feedback.
Welcome to Ohio University.
I mean, I think it also depends a great deal on the willingness.
So you got the OURC grant, so congratulations.
Because if they just, I just say, they just look at your comments and whatever.
Is that like a system?
Exactly.
Hey!
Right.
Yeah, you just got 3 million. Let me tell you how
Yeah,
much
can you
shit.
send me your proposal? You might be a little reluctant to do
So
that.
those are fellowships rather than grants.
Exactly, that's right. Who are you?
And so for example,
All right,
the
ladies and
NEH
gentlemen, should we resume, please?
And but the thing is that it's already beyond.
Arts and Sciences has a humanities specific fund, so you might want to talk to Brian McCarthy.
Yeah, I don't think
Why
that
don't
they're
you bring
doing
that
it
up?
for
I mean, it's not
stipends
just a
anymore.
question that's that narrow. So bring it up and we'll discuss it
yeah.
towards the end.
And then, would you be, I don't, the person that was talking about the writing group has left, but I'd be interested in doing a writing group like that for NEH, not an NIH.
Oh, perfect, yeah.
And we have 4 people on campus who are NEH reviewers, or have been. Yeah.
So bring up that.
So, yeah, bring that up, 'cause we'll be
Yeah,
able to
well,
talk
actually,
about it
towards the
broadly.
end, we'll sort of remind people about that program. But yes, no, by all means, bring it up. All right. My name is Sergio Yo. I'm in the physics department, like Rock said, and I'm a not early career researcher anymore.
Not an early career.
Not an early career
I like that.
anymore.
None of us are.
So we wanted to share with you some general tips on writing proposals. Now, say for example, my background, most of my grants go to the National Science Foundation, through the National Science Foundation or the Department of Energy. So I suppose you might see some of that coloring, if you will, in the comments. But I think that many of these points are generic. You really have to think about what is it you're proposing, and as it's almost common sense, right? So your idea must be plausible. So it needs to make sense that you somehow need to convey to the reader, your reviewer, your program monitor, what is it that you're trying to accomplish. You need to convince them that it's worth investing in that idea, because ultimately, as Bob said, unfortunately, the success rate in various agencies is not anything close to even 50%. I mean, if in the National Science Foundation these days is 30 in a good division, and if you're I'm a condensed matter theorist, the renewal rate is like 8%. So it is a really tough job. You have to convince a lot of people, and so you have to make your best effort. You have to convince them that it's doable, and so that it is important, as it says, show evidence that you can pull this off, and that many times means to have preliminary results. For that, I should also piggyback on what Rock said. The internal awards basically allow you to acquire that first data, preliminary results that you can put in your proposal and it will make it stronger, because it is not just a wild idea that you think will work. Here are some preliminary results. All right. Now, of course, the idea should be meaningful, and you need to put it in a bigger context. So of course, we're sort of trained to work in a narrow area of research. We're good at that. But then you always have to take a step back and say, how does this fit into the general structure or discipline? So you have to, again, have these both points of view, right? You have a general background, but you also can deliver whatever you're promising at the detail. And amazingly enough, you have to do this in 10 pages or less, or 15 if it is NSF. All right. Now, to say that this has never been done before is not necessarily compelling. So you have to, it may be the case, but now you have to explain why that is the case, and how is it that now all of a sudden you can achieve it. Because if it hasn't been done before, well, there's probably a reason. Or, so you need to convince that. It is important to show a timeline of the proposed work. Different agencies, again, have different requirements. So the Department of Defense, for example, requires very detailed timelines, almost to the quarter, as to what is it that you're going to be doing in the morning of whatever the third month. But NSF is much more lax, for example. But again, when I say NSF, again, my background is in physics. So different divisions in NSF have different cultures. And it is important that whenever you address an agency in this, not just for NSF, is that you talk to the program monitors, because they're there to, in fact, guide you through this. In fact, something else that Rox in the internal programs that the university supports is they will pay your way to go to Washington, say, and talk to the agencies. So if you are keen in learning about a particular program, of course you can always pick up the phone, but you can definitely make an appointment to go meet the person. And sometimes talking to that individual may not give you the information you want, but they have the inside information in the agency that will then guide you to the next person, to the most ideal one. And spending a day in Washington, the restaurants are good, and the university pays for that trip. Absolutely recommended. That is, when I was an early career researcher, somebody recommended that to me, and I thought it was wonderful, and it definitely made a difference in my career. So strongly recommended. So, well, and the third bullet is, of course, use figures to efficiently convey ideas. If you want the reviewer to read it, do not put it in the appendix. In fact, now NSF again has strict rules against putting anything that is meaningful in the appendices, because that will be a way to violate the 15-page rule. All right? So everything has to be there. Now, you can put supplementary material if you want that nobody will read, I have to tell you. But
it says supplement.
Nobody reads it. I mean, because again, like Bob was saying, you're a reviewer, and when you get the NSF calls you or whatever and says, will you help review this program? And you said, all right. So they send you a stack of whatever, 20, 30 proposals that you have to emit a response. So believe me, you don't read the supplements. So definitely it's got to be in the main body. Now, of course, you got to convince him, like Bob was saying, that you're the one to do this research. In something that is practical, which is the last bullet, is you make sure you read the most current guidelines. They tend to change them for a reason, and sometimes you're unpleasantly surprised at the last minute if they decided that a document has to be now in an Excel format instead of Word. I know it happens.
I just wanted to interrupt, and actually NSF, for example, is working on new guidelines that will be effective the end of January. So just be aware that if you are going to be submitting to NSF after the end of January, you will have new guidelines.
Thanks. Any idea what they're going to change?
There are several small things that will change, and we'll be talking about that at the December 13th workshop.
Very good. Oh, that's a nice commercial. There is going to be NSF writing workshop. What December 13th from 8 to 5, and yes, we will feed you morning and breakfast and lunch. Are there openings still? Yeah, I know they're there.
Yes.
But, okay. Well, it's a good be in case people need to leave. Now, all right. So your aim should be clear and simple, right? Simplicity is elegant, as it says. You need to tell a story, and at the end of the section, the reviewer should understand what is it that you're doing. Don't keep the reviewer in suspense until the end of the proposal. No. It doesn't work. All right. Of course, you gotta have well-linked, the logic. Of course, the infrastructure of the whole project should be clear. The last bullet, make sure you tell them at the beginning, tell them at the middle, tell them at the end what is it that you're doing. It should be, again, think that the reviewers are overwhelmed. The program monitors, God only knows they are too. And so you have to convey your message as succinctly and as well as possible. And repetition definitely helps. Now, you don't want to make it obvious, at least, but it's got to be readable. All right, please.
One thing, I don't know if I apologize if we make this point late, but I used to, in the beginning, I did my specific aims after I wrote my proposal and put all my effort like it was an abstract. This is like the most important part of many proposals, is the specific aims. Because if you don't have somebody's attention in that very beginning, you're in trouble. So we were talking about this guide that they're using for this faculty learning community, and Steve Russell, who's the person who wrote that, I've seen many presentations he does on proposal writing. He does this professionally, and they spend 90% of their time talking about specific aims page and how you want to really have that nailed down.
I guess just to chime in on that is because the specific aims page is short, it's typically one page, that's often a good thing to vet with, collaborators or peers that you trust, send it to them without you describing anything. Are they getting the picture? Do they think it's important? Do they think it's meaningful? And, somebody, more advanced colleague may not be wanting to read your 15-page proposal, but if you say, can you look at this one page, that might be a way to get feedback on the idea.
This is where you may want to make your comment about people outside the district.
Oh, right. And I forgot when I was making my remarks that I hear fairly frequently, as I was talking about proposal development, people raise concerns or they have a reticence to talk to people who are not experts in the field of the proposal. And I just wanted to say that it is important to get that kind of expert input if you can. That's often a challenge. But if you have someone who's far afield from a very different discipline even, they can often provide very good feedback because they're going to ask the simple question that may be pivotal in conveying your ideas clearly. They come in not knowing things, and so what's assumed in your writing with jargon, they're not going to understand. That feedback is very valuable.
Yeah. I wanted to add something to that too. We're all academics, so this is okay for me to say. Nothing pisses us off more than making us feel stupid. And if you have a proposal that you do not understand what they are doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, and why should you care, what do? You dismiss it. And that's a really easy way to get into that no pile. It's not because of science or the creative work wasn't good. It's just because you didn't speak to the reviewer and they simply didn't understand. Before you even start writing, it's really important for you to understand who your audience is. If you're going for like the internal awards, the OURCs and the Bakers, those committees are composed of almost every discipline on campus. If you're going to NIH, most likely you're going to be talking to somebody in your field. If you're going to the Department of Education, though, or NEH, you're going to get people who are in related fields but are not experts in your field. So understand who the audience is and do not piss them off or make them feel stupid.
Hi, I'm Alan Showalter. I'm from plant biology. So as far as where I submit my grants, NSF, like Sergio, but completely different review panel, USDA, and Department of Energy. So what we're talking about are things that really do span the gamut depending on where you're submitting your grant. These things I think are common. I would just add to our conversation there that I think the most important part of the grant is the summary or the abstract, in which you're going to be stating your specific aims, which I think are extremely important, and also what I'm going to talk about now, which is the impact of your work. Both of those important topics, your specific aims and your impact, will be reflected in a summary or abstract of your grant. Again, people don't have a lot of time. There will be stories where people only read your summary or abstract, and that's it. So that has to be really the most important part of the grant as I see it. So let me talk about an aspect that will be included in that abstract and a main part of your grant proposal. So that's impact. So why are you doing this work? How is that going to change the world? So it's really important that you spell that out. So what's the significance to not only the field in which you're working, but to society in general? Convey these deliverables, which is what they're often regarded as, specifically in this section of your proposal. And I'm usually talking about a significance section. Somewhere in your proposal, there'll be significance, and you can put all of that information there. How is the information that you're going to gather from doing this particular project going to change the field? How is it going to change society? How is it going to change practices? And another thing we don't want to forget, being at academic institution, many times this goes right into teaching, training, instruction. How is it going to impact students that are working on this project and what they do after they leave here at the university and their time with you? Now, this is so important, in fact, that NSF several years ago switched to the abstract or grant summary having two very specific things that you have to include. Before that time, people would include it, but NSF wanted it so upfront that now when you fill in your summary, there are two specific things you're going to have to be talking about: intellectual merit and broader impacts. So intellectual merit is how this work, your proposal, is going to impact your field, and broader impacts is more a societal kind of thing. So it's just that important, at least to NSF, and I think all the other funding agencies, you want to show these same kind of ideas. How's this going to impact your field? How will it impact society if you get this grant?
It just occurs to me as we're doing this that I think specific aims is a sort of an NIH term of art, and Alan's talking about these NSF terms of art. And so one of the challenges you have as you're thinking about agencies is to translate what, for your proposal, is the same content. So that's the active learning part of this presentation, is you have the specific aims are the goals, really. And
right,
then these are, why are those goals important? So you have to do that translation from some of this language. I just
right.
realized.
So NSF will have a term that's even broader. We'll call it objectives. What's the objectives? And under that, we have the specific aims are included as part of the objectives. Often listed as bullet points or numerical points. Here's what I plan to do. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's usually not more than 3 or 4. I think you get dinged if you propose too much. Okay. So, intellectual merit. So there's a number of things that you want to be talking about here. How is it going to advance your field? That's critical. But then part of this is, how qualified are you to do this? You, again, want to convince people throughout the proposal that you're the best person to do this work, that you have the qualifications to do it, and by doing it, you're going to be impacting your field. And then there's this aspect of doing something that's not just Me Too research. You want to do something, even though the word may be overused, transformative, or something that has a wow factor. Something that makes people stand up and take notice, that your proposal is a little different than some of these others that the reviewers are reading, something that makes it sort of stand out. And then, hopefully, it's well conceived and organized, we heard that point before, and that you have access to any resources that you need. When it comes to broader impacts, you want to think about how this work is going to also maybe promote teaching and training and learning. So think about the impact to the students and then what they'll do beyond their time working on this project. How will they influence things in the future? You're training the next generation. You should advertise this. Usually, things look quite favorably if you're including the participation of underrepresented groups. So you want to think about how you can involve underrepresented groups in your project. That is usually viewed as a big plus if you have a good plan to do that.
So I just want to, and I hope everyone being new here recognizes what one of our underrepresented groups is here in Southeast Ohio.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so in addition to underrepresented, there's also what's called underserved populations, and so people from the Appalachian region who have lower educational attainment and also lower socioeconomic values are also considered as part of underserved.
Right, so Appalachian students, this is something that all of us can include in proposals that we write, because we are helping to train this next generation of Appalachian.
And also first generation college, sorry.
Let's see, so I think you also want to think about how whatever you do is going to enhance the research infrastructure that you would have not only in your own, I'll say laboratory in my case, but things that could be used as a resource to other people in the field or in society by setting up some particular infrastructure. And then how are you going to disseminate this information that you would glean from doing your project? How's it going to be presented to other members in your field, to society? Often this includes maybe generating web pages that would have some access to the information that you would have generated. So you want to disseminate it. You don't just want to be sitting on this. And then society at large, how is it going to be benefited by the work that you're doing? Usually in projects, you're going to have some kind of outreach activity that is going to allow you to engage the public. That's, again, a big positive. There's more examples if you want to follow that web link. So I'm going to hand this off to Julie Owens now in psychology.
Hi, I'm Julie Owens. I'm in clinical child psychology, and my area is in school mental health. So we're developing and evaluating mental health interventions in the context of education. So a lot of my funding has come from foundations, states, and then the Centers for Disease Control and the Institute of Education Sciences. So we've been talking a lot about sort of writing and big picture things, but that's, and while that's an important part and probably the critical, there's also many other parts to the application. So one of the things you need to think about is staffing and your team. So certainly you need to convince the reviewers that you are the best PI for the team, but I think, at least in my field, long gone are the days when a single investigator is ever going to get funded, right? They're going to look at you and your team. And so you may need to think about, okay, where am I strong and where's my expertise, and where do I need to supplement my team to make a really strong team? And so it could be someone else in your area who's more senior, and you can also say is going to assist with grants management because you've never had a national grant before. Or it may be that it's a different area. So if I understand how to develop interventions and evaluate them, but I don't have the economical expertise to do a cost analysis, then I might bring in a consultant, or if it's a primary aim, I might bring them on as a co-investigator. So you kind of need to think about where are your strengths and where are your weaknesses, and then supplement your team so that you have a strong team. And so you can be adding expertise, you can be adding mentorship, you can be adding tech support, statistical analysis, any of those sorts of things. You also want to think about if you're doing social sciences work or work with human participants, do you want to do a single site study or a multi-site study? And there's certainly advantages to multi-site in the sense that you only have to recruit half your sample and the other site's doing the other half. You can enhance diversity. You might be able to obtain different types of populations that we can't here in Southeast Ohio. So there are advantages to that. But also you need to move into this with a lot of knowledge about some of the disadvantages, right? So as soon as you have 2 sites, you have to devote a lot of energy to making sure that all your procedures are equivalent or consistent across sites. And that does take a lot of time and energy to make sure 2 projects are training staff in the same way, implementing the procedures in the same way. But again, that for some projects, that cost is outweighed by the benefits. You may also need to think about with the multi-site, just the cost that you have to now fund double the staff, right, to carry this off. So there's definitely advantages and disadvantages. Also, I've gotten into excellent collaborations across site, and then I've gotten into some that, 3 years at the end of the grant, you're wishing that you had chosen somebody else. So in hindsight, you need to, get to know your collaborators maybe with a small project before you leap into a 3 to 5 year national grant. Make sure that these are the right colleagues for you. Also, just even thinking about how you're going to staff the project, there's advantages and disadvantages to different type of staffing setups, right? So a postdoc is probably one of the most expensive staff members, but they may also be the most qualified scientifically, right? They can help you crank out publications in your pre-tenure period. But you also need to think about, can I afford them? And then am I also giving them time for their own career development? That may take a little bit of time away from the project. And the flip side, graduate students are the cheapest, right? But they also have other demands, like their courses, or for us, they're seeing clients. And so can they really carry out the tasks of the project while also managing these other demands? Or you can hire staff. And that's the beauty of hiring staff, is that they are fully devoted to your project. So need to be thinking about that, and make sure that your budget narrative and your staffing plan makes sense to the tasks that you have to do. So I think that's some ideas about staffing and team, and Alan is going to talk a little bit about how that's specific to NSF.
Do you want to invite questions?
Yeah,
everybody's quiet.
You guys are a quiet group. Are there questions along the way? Just speak up. And even if you think it's too specific to you, there's probably others in the room that have some similar questions.
There is a lot of information that we're sort of throwing at you, and I think it'll be nice if you find some resistance, wherever it is, let us know so that we have a conversation.
I would say one thing about the setting up collaboration. That's great work to get accomplished at conferences. It's a great excuse to meet somebody you might want to meet if you have an idea for a proposal. I've had collaborators. Good ones are really fantastic. It's like, I won't say, like graduate students, kind of. Some are fantastic and push your work forward way more than you could. Others are like dead weight, holding you back. Or worse, in the case of professional collaborators, because you can't really boss around your collaborators. So, it's just like a lot of things in life. Spending enough time to get to know people is really important, because then you can not get into situations where all of the bad things happen. People never deliver on time. They're so self-interested that they don't care about your project that much. We could tell stories, everyone who's here, about the challenges of that collaboration, but one way to, I think, help with that is if you get to know people personally. And conferences are a place you might not have thought about trying to establish some of those relationships, but I think that's a really good opportunity. You just turn that on, probably.
Just turn it on, yeah.
Okay, so basically, once you apply for a grant and you're able to collect your data, and then you need time to write your article, are there any kind of fellowships that we can apply for to either get a course release, or that would give us a stipend over the summer where we could get out the articles? Because the data collection is the first part, and the analysis, and most of the grants give you the money to do that. But what the time after to do something to disseminate your work, that's where sometimes we need a little bit more support.
Okay.
Yeah, the answer is no. I mean, that's your job. I mean, to be quite honest, that is your core job, to write up that scholarship. So the idea of getting release time to me is no. That's the deal that we make that we don't talk about on most campuses. People ask you about, oh, you have your summer off. No, you don't. And it's really, in some sense, uncompensated time, right? Because you have to be working on your papers and on your grants. And it's great if you can get external funders to support that. And that's the nice thing, if you can get access to federal funding, because then you actually can support yourself. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, that's just an expectation that I think we all have that we don't really talk about, right? That you've got a 12-month-a-year job, and just because you might not be having an assigned teaching responsibility, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't be working on these things. So there may be some very rare opportunities where, like, you could get a fellowship to do writing, but I have to say, from my perspective, that's your, and it's the other reason to submit a lot of grants too, by the way, because then some of your colleagues will say, that's the way you get the continuous funding to be able to work on the projects in a little more concentrated way.
Yeah. I would add to it, certainly federal funding, foundation funding, external funding in general, does allow you to ask for time to do your research, which includes the analysis and the writing. But that means that you have to be thinking quite a bit ahead of time, right? So, for example, there's the NEH summer stipend, which pays for you to do exactly what you're asking, but you have to apply for it 18 months in advance of the summer that you actually need it. And so that does require some forethought. Same thing with other grants, is that, yes, you can pay for yourself. Certainly, most federal funding agencies want you to put in 1 month of summer salary, but you have to get those grants.
Right. I'd say it's.
I think it's fine.
Yeah, I'd say that getting a grant and the 1 month of summer salary, that's probably the easiest solution to this, if one can get a grant like that to do it. Mm-hmm. But I think, there is this expectation that we may be 9 months, but we're working like all year round on projects.
I knew who I was talking to. So in the sciences, that's common. In the humanities, summer support, other than some very specialized programs, is fairly uncommon. So I think Rox is right. You can work it in to your schedule, but sort of having the expectation that, I finished this project up and now I'm going to get this more time to actually write it up. That's going to be a rare situation that you're going to get somebody to pay just for that.
Yeah, just to pay for that is unusual. But if you have the foresight to know that data analysis is a large part of your research, then go after that grant. And I do want to say, I think that there is this perception that funding is out there just for the sciences, and that's not true. NSF funds social sciences. Foundations fund social sciences. If you go into Leo, you're going to see that this university and this faculty has a strong and has had a strong funding history in the social sciences. I think that we need to build that back up, though. And so I'm hoping to work with you on that.
I think the other thing too is that some of the tricks that we learn as a function of what we're doing now is because of things like this. So the next time you write your next grant, you think about, okay, I want to be having this project done with 6 months left in my last year, so that I do have time while I'm funded to be analyzing and to be writing it up. So think about the mistakes we make, how you change that in your next grant.
And that's a very common one.
Yeah.
I could say is that you don't think about what you're bringing up, Ashwini, exactly, which is you're thinking just about getting to the end of the funding, but not that this part.
Okay, I think in the interest of time, we better move on. Julie brought up the fact that postdocs are one of the more expensive people you could put on your grant, but also the most highly trained. NSF several years ago recognized it's important for what kind of mentoring these postdocs are receiving if you're training them in your laboratory or whatever your situation is. So there's a specific document that you have to include in your proposal. And I think it's useful to think about, especially Bob was talking about, thinking 9 months out, what I'm going to need in my proposal. You may think, oh, I just need my research proposal, specific aims, impact, what things I'm going to do, whether they're experiments or whatever. But most proposals have a lot of other documents associated with them. And you don't want to wait to the last minute, oh, my proposal's done. Oh, I forgot my postdoc mentoring plan. And then you're madly rushing around at that 11th hour, and it's not a good way to do business. So read the proposal guidelines, see what you're in for, talk to other colleagues that have done this before, look at their proposals if they're willing to share them. And we have a proposal library that we're trying to build that would allow you to begin to do this. But it is very grant specific, agency specific. But realize there may be multiple documents you're going to have to submit, and you don't want to be doing them all at the last minute after you got the real meat and potatoes part of your proposal done to find out, oh, I need this other document. Because things like this can make or break a proposal. Mm-hmm. It's not as important as specific aims and impact, but it's still important. There is no unimportant part of your proposal. Everything has to be top-notch, including something that you might think is mundane as a mentoring plan. It's not viewed that way. You can be dinged on any of these other documents. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure everything is top-notch. Okay, Julie, I think you have some budget things.
So certainly we can also just open it up to questions about budget. It is sometimes a sensitive topic, and so people are afraid to ask questions about it, but don't be afraid to ask questions. I guess just like Alan said, don't wait to the last minute to do your budget either, because you may have this amazing experimental design and longitudinal study that you want to do, and then you get to the budget and you're like, oh, I can't afford this. And you have to really redesign how you're going to answer your research question because you don't have the staff or you don't have the resources in this budget mechanism. So certainly talk to your pre-award staff, whether they're in your department or in the college, because they can set you up with an Excel sheet that has all the formulas for benefits and healthcare and all this stuff embedded in there. And then all you have to do is just play with the numbers and percentages, and everything will, fall in line. So get that spreadsheet in advance. You can talk to them conceptually. I want to hire this person. I want this kind of grad students. I need this. And they can turn that into the numbers of the Excel sheet, and then you can go back and forth. So you don't need to do it all by yourself.
Can I just say, you will fail if you try to do it all by yourself.
Yes.
And I want to just add one thing. So everybody knows what ORSP is, right? The Office for Research and Sponsored Programs. And we have managers who are there to help you. As soon as you know that you are even thinking about applying for a grant application, notify them. Because what they're doing is they're reading the solicitation, they're keeping up to date with any deadlines, they're helping you with the budget, they're making sure that you have all the different pieces to it. If it's NIH and NSF, they know what they're doing. But if they have to learn a new sponsor, you got to give them the time to actually do their homework, so that way they can help you.
So, you're going to have to think about things like how are you going to distribute the salary? You can take course buyouts potentially in your own department. You can have summer salary, and those things are very different. So you need to educate yourself about what those two things are. You need to understand that when you hire staff, you have to pay for benefits. I think the first time I hired a postdoc and it was like, okay, I have to budget $45K. No, I need to budget $75K because I have to pay for all the benefits that go with that. So that was a huge surprise up front. And then of course equipment, one-time purchases or maintenance costs, those things all come into play. Also, some agencies are very, very specific about your travel. Like I had to specify literally at the point of the budget writing, you know, where we were going to fly and the per diem for those cities. And so we have resources, you know, there's per diem costs, there's mileage costs, all of these things are here at the OU website under the finance. Thinking about, you know, human subjects payments. And then you do need to also understand indirect costs, because if you're doing a project that's more off campus than on campus, that's a very different indirect cost rate than if it's on campus. And so you would need to be thinking about that in your budget. Some agencies don't do indirect costs, and so you'd want to know that up front as well.
Could you define indirect costs?
So, yeah, you might be able to do this more officially than what I could do. But if you are, indirect costs are the costs that come to the university to support the infrastructure associated with research. So if you are submitting a 100K grant and our indirect cost rate is 45%, I mean, you basically are asking for 150K because that other 50K is going to be distributed across the college, the research office. Some of it comes back to the PI. Actually, a fair amount comes back to the PI at this university, much higher than at some other universities, which is nice because that's a discretionary fund for you to use for things that are maybe not in your grant budget or for travel afterwards, or, you know, things that you might not have thought of at the time of grant writing. But you do need to understand those indirect costs, and they go into the budget. And of course, the ORSP folks build that into your budgets. But don't be shocked when you have to ask for, you know, half as much more than you thought because of the indirects.
I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second and wake you all up. Okay, raise your hands. How many of you think that it's better to ask for too much and seem greedy? How many think it's better to lowball it so it shows like, you know, you're really trying to give them a deal? Thank God no one said that. Okay, good. Because what happens is if you lowball and they know that you cannot do the project, you've shot yourself in the foot. You have now made your project unfeasible. So ask for what you need and justify it.
Well, it's a kind of a test of competences, actually.
Yeah,
Right? If you're a reviewer and you're looking and someone says this budget just is too small
Yeah.
to do this project, you're done.
Question?
What happens when you run out of money? Like if the project ends up taking longer or more resources than anticipated, what happens when you run out of money?
Okay, so what happens when you run out of money? Well, then you can go after the internal award like the Baker program, which are bridging funds. Occasionally you can work with your department, but the big thing is that if you have those indirect costs, that's where you go into your funds and you spend your own indirect costs now on the project funds until you get the next grant. Welcome.
Okay, so just a word on pilot data or preliminary data. Rox has mentioned several internal seed grants that you can use to get pilot data. Our committee has also worked with the Vice President for Research and Dean Frank to reinvigorate what we call the Research Enhancement Initiative. And so this is the idea that we want to promote internal review and collaboration prior to submitting your grant. And so the research enhancement allows you to identify a colleague prior to submitting your proposal, actually several months prior to submitting your proposal, where the colleague will agree to peer critique your proposal before it goes in. And you do need to email Brian McCarthy to let him know, you know, we want to do this. This is my collaborator who's going to be a peer critique, peer critic, and you submit a plan to do that. And then once you submit the actual grant, then you will receive up to $5,000 that can serve as additional funding for pilot data while you're waiting for your reviews. Because as we all know, nothing gets funded on the first time. If you're still under that belief, then walk away today knowing you will not get funded on the first time. When you do have pilot data, it is exciting, but make sure you connect that pilot data to your proposal. So show them that, look, I'm proposing to do this methodology, and my pilot data shows I can successfully do that methodology. So think about showing feasibility data in terms of how many folks I ran through this procedure, how long it took, or how much money it took for me to do this, so that it's well connected. You know, convey it very concisely in figures and tables. If it's all in text and they have to read about it, it might just be nice if it just pops out in a table and a figure. If you're talking about, look, this is preliminary evidence that my idea has proof of concept. So connect it well. Questions about pilot data?
I just want to say something. Never put any pilot data in your grant that doesn't support your hypothesis.
Right.
We get that a lot. And n equals 1 typically isn't the kind of data that you want to, I mean, ethnography, yeah, but, you know, quantitative, typically no.
Another piece of the grant is a data management plan. And so again, don't, is this your part, Alex? Okay. Don't think about this at the end. Again, this is particularly important if you're doing cross-site work. So what are the data formats that you're going to have? Who's going to have access to it? How are you going to share it, particularly in a confidential way? What is, you know, the process for archiving it? So all of these things may need to go into a data management plan depending on the agency that you are submitting to. And with that, all of our work is with human subjects, and it's usually confidential mental health information. So even when we capture it, it needs to be HIPAA compliant. So we do have on campus the REDCap system, Research Electronic Data Capture. It's a phenomenal system that is HIPAA compliant. You can set it up for surveys longitudinally. You can email out surveys, like we emailed out surveys to over 300 teachers, you know, in an instant, and they get an individual email link to an individual child. So there's lots of sophistication in REDCap that is, I know some people use Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey. REDCap blows both of those out of the water in terms of sophistication. And so if you're interested in that, actually Sean Tams, who is a graduate student in our department, is in charge of doing trainings around campus for REDCap. So if you individually want that, or if you want that for your department, you can email him or go to our REDCap website and you'll see how you can attend basic trainings or advanced trainings. Is this me too? Okay. I mean, we've talked a lot about peer critique. So whether it's actually a mentor or a peer colleague, get your proposal critiqued multiple times if you can before it goes out for external review. You'd much rather know about those holes in your thinking and the holes in the science before it's your one big shot. And so we really want to try to create that culture here on campus. That's part of what the mission of our committee is. That's part of why we're, you know, opening these things up across the college and across the university. We hope you meet somebody here today that maybe is doing something similar, or just similar enough that would push your thinking to a different level. Have coffee with them. Tell the dean about it. He might support a coffee for you to meet together. But really, you know, find colleagues that can critique your work prior to, and consider, you know, applying for that research enhancement money.
I also just want to kick in both the internal awards, OURC and Baker. Not only do you get comments from the internal committee, but you also get them from external reviewers, and that can be helpful.
Yeah, I also wanted to say on this is one of those preparing far in advance items. Because if you're going to ask somebody to read your work, you can't give them like 48 hours and have them feel good about that. So this is, I think, one of the main components about trying to get things in place well before the deadline so that you can give somebody a week or whatever you can mutually agree to. But that's something that does not feel collegial when somebody sends a long document to you at the last minute.
And just the same, if you are asked to critique, again, this is not the things we're paid for, but if we are invested in building a community of research, that's what we do back and forth for each other. And don't just comment on verb tense and commas. Be a good peer critique, you know, really in a constructive way. Say, hey, have you thought about this? Or this part doesn't make sense, or this isn't clear, or have you thought about this confound in your experiment? You know, like really push them to do thinking.
Yeah, saying this is unclear is kind of a polite way to say this needs more work. So.
One other thing I want to add, very often we send out our proposals for critique and we forget to send the guidelines. Mm-hmm. You need to send the guidelines because that's the list of questions and the proposal are the answers. So you need to make sure that the person is not only compliant, but responsive.
And then I guess just in terms of responding to reviews, we have a fourth committee member, Steve Miner, who's not here, but he is also working to develop a workshop like this for the social sciences and humanities. So stay tuned for that. There's such a heterogeneity in that group of faculty that we're trying to figure out what's the best focus for that workshop. Is it, securing an agent for the book? Is it, different types of humanities grants and fellowships? But that is on the horizon. So just, I guess, stay tuned on the website and watch your emails for that. There he is. Speak of the guy. So in terms of responding to reviews, I mean, the main thing is don't get discouraged. It's hard to say that because we will get discouraged, and it is really hard to take when you think you've put out your best work and it comes back not scored or scored worse than you thought. But you just have to, read it through the first time and be angry at it and put it aside, and then read it the second time and be angry again and go talk to your colleague about how angry you are, and then read it a third time and, try to view it as constructive criticism and try to look at, what did they not understand? What are they critiquing? How can I be clearer about this? And really talk to the program officer too. A lot of times the program officers who have no bearing on your decision of funding were in the room and at least heard the discussion among those who did decide about your funding level. And so they can comment to you about what they heard that may or may not be written, that may be reading between the lines. So definitely pick up the phone and call the program officer and get a read on their sort of sense of it, because you may look at those numbers and think it was awful. And then you go talk to the program officer and they're very encouraging. And they'll say, if you just fix this one thing, everybody got hung up on this one thing and it was a big ding. But you may not have that perspective unless you talk to them about that. And then once you start to write your reviews, you'll probably write it to some extent in a snarky way to get back at those reviewers. Don't send that version. Send that out to your colleagues along with the reviews and say, I am responding to this. Have I taken all the negative tone out of it? Am I really responding to the crux of it as opposed to just being angry at what they didn't understand? So even responding to the reviews is a long-term process where you have iterative versions of this until you really hone it to be as precise as possible. Most agencies only give you, 1 to 3 pages to respond, so you can't go on and on. You really need to focus in on the response. Other comments about responding to reviews?
I mean, just in some divisions, you don't even get allowed to, you're not allowed to respond. You're basically giving a decision and that's it. Mm-hmm. So the negative comment should be taken as advice for your next submission.
That's correct. So
in that sense, it doesn't make sense for you to yell at the program officer. It's it's really kind of counterproducing. Instead, just think about it and really inquire as to how could you improve the text.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I don't mean like as a revise and resubmit, but like for Institute of Education Sciences, you do get the reviews, and you not only have to deal with it in the next proposal, but you do have to respond to them and say how you respond to them in the proposal. Yeah. So obviously it's different for different agencies. So,
but that's not a bad practice with someone that's helping to critique. Is you want to do that.
Thank you.
Question? Yeah.
I was just going to ask, if you were to call the program officer to get their feedback, how would you frame that? Because it feels a little, for me, like a little uncomfortable to say, like, can I have, how would you frame that question?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So how do you talk to program officers? Prior to submitting the grant is also another good time to talk to program officers and vet your idea. But make sure that when you call the program officer, you have an idea and that you're asking intelligent questions, right? So we don't want to ask silly questions that we can figure out on our own, either by reading the guidelines or, from the website. That will irritate program officers.
Yeah, it does.
But if you have, like what I do when I get my reviews, I usually try to formulate responses to them, and I'll say, hey, I'd like to run some of these responses by you, right? So I'm like, I'm waffling about this, so I could respond this way, or I could respond this way, right? And so they might give you a sense of, oh, no, that really wasn't the issue in the room. The issue was more your response B, go that route. So you may want to have formulated some of your ideas first and just say you want their feedback on it. Or you could say, I'm about to embark on my responses and I just wanted to see if you had any other perspective that I'm not considering before I do that.
I would just add and say that's part of their job. They understand that to interact with us. So don't be shy about contacting them. I think a lot of us are. We like to just sit in our office, do our own thing, But here, it really pays to talk to some of the program officers. You can get some insightful information if you go with good questions. Not open-ended kind of things, but specific things like Julie was mentioning. When it comes back to reviews of something that was not funded, you can go back with, I'm thinking about addressing this particular comment by doing these particular things. What do you think? Is that going to satisfy? So if you go with specific comments and don't be afraid to call them before the proposal, afterwards, if it has gone down, that's their job. That's part of their job.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So just
Another good thing to do at a meeting, at a conference.
Right.
Find an excuse to talk to the program
absolutely.
officers.
Yeah. Get them excited about
one
your
other
ideas.
thing. You're hot and heavy. It's just like you're going in there. You got an agenda, right? I only have a few minutes to talk to this program officer, and by God, they're going to listen to me. No. Ask the questions and then breathe. Whatever you have to do to pop something in your mouth, to just shut up for a minute and let them talk, you need to listen, because what you're going to do is you're going to not only hear the response, but you're going to hear how they respond and things that they respond to. Some things they're not going to like, some things they are going to like, and there are going to be certain words that they use. You might even want to write those words down and feed it back to them in the proposal. Listening is the most important thing you can do after asking those questions.
So I think we're running tight on time, but just, I guess, kind of some wrapping up messages. Obviously, reviewers are people too. Just as a context, I review for IES. I get my 8 to 10 reviews, 25-page grants on December 10th, and they're due January 15th. So that's when they want us to be reviewing these 25-page documents, right? So it's a lot of work in a short amount of time, and so do whatever you can to make it pop off the page, to make it really look like it's a meaningful impact, to, as Alan said, just make every single piece top notch, because reviewers are looking to reject. How do I put this into a pile that can weed out, some of the things we're going to talk about at the meeting? So we've given you the top 10 list about being persistent, talk to program officers, get peer critique, have a great idea, convince them you're the best person to do the work. We've got the Cubs up there because they were the best example of persistence we could think of. Read other grants. So we did just start a proposal library. If you're interested in what's in that proposal library, you can email Brian McCarthy again. There is one from about 5 different agencies, and so there might be the agency you're looking for, but we're hoping to build that. So if you are in the room and you have a successful proposal that you're willing to share and redact some information, let us know or let Brian know.
And if not, go into Leo, find out who does have funding from that agency, and be brave enough to ask if you could maybe look at their proposal.
There you go. All right, so just a few other things going on. You heard Darcy Allen talk about a learning community. If you're interested in building one of those, there is a deadline for that in the spring. The College of Arts and Sciences has just launched a new initiative for graduate student research fund, so 20 awards of $1,000 annually. There's other advanced workshops happening, so our committee may be doing one in the spring. We will send you all a survey in the next week, and if you complete that and let us know what agencies you'd like to hear from, we might be able to have enough energy to have a focused grant workshop. But Rox is also leading one for NSF, December 13th. Steve Miner, when he walked in, where'd he go? He's behind the podium, or the pole, I can't see him, but he is putting together one for social sciences and humanities. There's pivot workshops coming up. There's a grant proposal library you can access, and we have the research enhancement funds for peer critique and pilot data.
So any questions we can try to address that we didn't do a good enough job on today? Questions? Anybody?
Alan, could folks address emails to the research committee?
Of course, we'd be glad to. Send them to any one of us. Steve is more the humanities, social science contact, and Sergio is in physics, Julie's in psychology, I'm in plant biology. But send them to us, and we'll get them to the right people if you don't know the right person to address. I think some of this is don't be shy about contacting your colleagues. Just here at Ohio University, Rox said, If you can go in and find somebody that's done something similar, send them an email, give them a call, see if they're willing to at least talk to you about what they had submitted and maybe some tips. Just like we've been trying to give you tips today, they probably have some very more specific tips on the agency to which they applied.
And please give us feedback on the survey. We're open to peer critique. What could we do better as a committee to facilitate, the grant community, and what can we do better specifically to workshops like this? We're open to modifying things.
Good luck.
You can find us when you need us.